Gonzaga's annual jaunt into the second round of the NCAA tournament will now no longer coincide with the opening of the transfer portal window, as the NCAA finally came to their senses.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, place your first $5 bet now, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. We got a lot to cover today on the show. We're talking about Gonzaga women's new look roster. We're talking their non-conference schedule. They got FanFest on Saturday, so we're getting you all set and ready for the upcoming season for Coach Lisa Fortier's team. We're also taking a look at Evan Miyakawa's preseason rankings, team rankings, player projections, offensive rankings, defensive rankings, all sorts of great stuff on Evan's site, including some pretty good thoughts about the Zags. So we're going to talk about what that means for this program. And then we're going to lead the show talking about the new news out of the NCAA, a couple of big updates coming in kind of preparation for the House versus NCAA lawsuit and the settlement that's coming, officially going to be finalized in April of 2025 with the final hearings for that. But we're already starting to see the NCAA make some big moves in preparation for that, including what I teased in the opening, a shortening of the transfer portal window. Now, this makes a bigger impact on the football side of things. They are keeping the spring window. They're shortening the fall window. It's a whole big thing on the football side of things, as they've had these kind of dual transfer portal windows for a while, which I can't even imagine what that would be like on the basketball side of things. But winter sports have only ever had that one transfer portal window. And now, instead of being 45 days long, which was a new change last year, if you recall 2 years ago, there was a transfer portal window, but it was longer than that. I think it was 60, it might have been 90 days that the transfer portal was open that first year, but grad transfers could enter at any time. And we had players entering the transfer portal in September. It was complete anarchy. Last year, things were tightened up much more. It was a 45-day window to enter the transfer portal. That was for graduate students as well. So no matter what, you were locked in. If you hadn't entered the transfer portal yet, you could not make a change barring your coach getting let go or fired or choosing to take another job. That rule has not changed. It doesn't really impact Gonzaga, at least not in terms of their roster. It could impact them trying to bring other players in. But for intents and purposes, the rule regarding that is if your coach leaves 30 days from the day that they're out the door, there's a transfer portal window that opens. And I like that rule. I think that makes a ton of sense. I think players in particular should have autonomy to leave programs when the coach typically is the person who recruited them in the first place. When the coach leaves, you should have the ability to also leave in that situation. But now, this upcoming offseason, the transfer portal window will shrink again from 45 days to 30 days. Players will have basically 1 month to decide if they want to enter the transfer portal. After that, again, barring a coaching change or an extenuating circumstance that gets approval from the NCAA, players will not be able to enter the transfer portal. The other main thing that this changes, it is not going to be 30 days bumped up. It is 30 days bumped back. And this is great news. It means that the transfer portal window is opening immediately at the conclusion of the second round of the NCAA tournament. Previously, it was opening right at the end of Selection Sunday, basically right at the start of the NCAA tournament. Boom. That is when the transfer portal window was opening. We had these two huge things happening at once. As a media member, it was chaotic, but for the players, for the coaches, I think it was even more just frustrating to have to be. It almost felt like coaches were being punished. If your team was in the NCAA tournament, you now had less time to evaluate transfer portal options, the players that entered right away, which a lot of the times some of the better players who entered the transfer portal were guys who did it very early. They were players on bad teams. They knew they wanted to go somewhere else. if we're being honest, they had probably already had, bugs in their ear throughout the season of, hey, enter the portal after the year. We'd love to offer you so-and-so. We think you'd be a great replacement for so-and-so on our roster. So a lot of the best players who enter the portal do it early. And now that won't be able to happen until after the second round of the NCAA tournament. At that point, far less teams will still be participating in the tournament. The ones that won't be participating for much longer because there's only a couple of weeks left in the season. So even though it's only a 30-day window, you will have more time. You won't be kind of having to juggle both things as much as we were in the past, because this was a challenge. I mean, heck, the Zags landed Mike Lejayi out of the transfer portal while they were still in the NCAA tournament. Kudos to Mark Few and Stephen Gentry and Brian Michelson and the whole staff there, RJ Barsh, for getting this done and knocking it out. And I mean, Houston Millett committed to Alabama at the same time, like right around the same time, while Alabama was, of course, still in the NCAA tournament as well. So it's not like coaching staffs hadn't figured out how to do it, but it's not ideal. It's not ideal for the coaches. It's not ideal for the players. I think some players know, a lot of them know that they want out. The Pepperdine guys knew they wanted out because they knew Romar was going to get fired, or they had he already had been fired. I don't remember the timing, but those guys entered the portal because they knew that Coach Romar was not coming back. And so I get it, especially WCC schools. Like, we'll use Pepperdine as an example again. Like, players at Pepperdine this year, or Pacific, or somebody like that who loses in the first round of the WCC tournament, that happens in early March. Your season's over like March 5th. And now, with this new rule, they won't be able to enter the transfer portal until after the second weekend of the tournament. So they're going to have to just sit around and wait for a couple of weeks. But I think that's better, because entering the transfer portal and then either being recruited by coaches that are currently on the road and in the tournament and trying to focus on two different things, or you're going to get more attention from coaches who are not in the NCAA tournament. And it just feels like this should be done. I mean, frankly, it should be done when all of the teams are done playing, but I understand why it's done this way. I get it. I think this is better. It is a solution to a problem. It is maybe not perfect, but I understand why they don't wait until the end of the season. So I think that this is a better situation. It's better for coaches. It's better for players. It's better for fans. It's better for media members. It just kind of works out more harmoniously for everybody in this situation. The other thing that happened here, the NCAA approved the immediate elimination of the NLI program. That is not NIL. That is NLI. They are not getting rid of national letters of intent simply because of the confusion of how it sounds so similar to NIL, although I'm sure it helps that's been a source of confusion for the last couple of years. NLI, National Letter of Intent, started in 1964. It's a formal binding agreement between prospective student athletes in the school. It's what you sign to say, this is the school that I'm going to. And it's got all sorts of agreements in it. It's got your scholarship information, financial aid, all sorts of stuff. As somebody who worked in higher education with student athletes for 5 years at the University of Portland and at Seattle U, like, NLI signing day is a big deal. The student athletes come in, they sign their documents. A lot of times their family's there for celebration, but also to like understand what they're signing, what they're agreeing to, things like that. There's a lot of legality and formality to it. And so while we're getting rid of the NLI, a lot of that formality is still going to exist. So it's not a dramatic change. It sounds like a more dramatic change than it is, because it's being replaced by a formal financial aid agreement, which is going to have the similar functions. Stuff like agreeing to let athletic trainers have a medical role with your medical records, allowing strength and conditioning coaches to have access to certain things, things like allowing people to have access to your grades, like all sorts of different, just various functions that exist in higher education that is tailored to student athletes were kind of covered by this NLI. And so that, again, that functionality is not going away. It can't go away. Legally, it needs to be there in some capacity. But the reason that there is a change happening here is that eventually, when the House versus NCAA lawsuit is settled, which it's trending towards happening in April, again, April 7th, 2025 is when the final hearing for approval is set to be done. When that happens, schools will be able to pay players directly through a revenue sharing system. When that happens, players who are entering the transfer portal and choosing to go to school, so they enter the transfer portal, they say, I'm going to Gonzaga, that's where I want to go. They will sign a formal financial aid agreement, which is what's replacing the NLI, but then they will also sign some type of contract. This is fantastic news. I've been a strong advocate that contracts need to be in some way a part of this college athletic experience now. They have to be. whether these contracts are written year over year, how it all works, all those details there, that is still something that we're going to figure out down the line. It's either still being discussed or is going to, they're going to have rules and then they're going to change them. It's going to be adjusted and tweaked and all that. But the overall move towards contracts being part of college athletics is a good thing. I know some people like shiver when they hear the word contracts and they think it's wrong or whatever, but I can promise you right now that the Wild West, where players are playing for large amounts of money but are not signing contracts, there's no legal binding process that is keeping these students it's a mess right now. We're seeing players on the football side of things just decide to redshirt because they're not getting paid. They were promised a certain amount of money. It's not happening. Contracts eliminates all those problems. So this is a good, positive step in the right direction. The fact that college athletics right now is less regulated than the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, the NHL, Major League Soccer, et cetera, they all have more rules and regulations regarding player movement and autonomy and contracts and legality, all that stuff. It is not a good system when young kids, as young as 18, 22, in that range, are not being given the same protections that we're giving professional athletes, while these kids are signing contracts sometimes as big as what we're seeing professional athletes sign. This is a good, positive direction that things are moving in the NCAA. There's still a lot to be done, a lot of things that will change, that have changed, that are maybe not the best changes. Some that are good changes. We'll certainly have more coverage on that stuff and what it means for Gonzaga specifically. But right now, these latest updates seem to be trending in the right direction for college basketball, for Gonzaga basketball, and for the entire college landscape in general. Well, we're going to move on and talk about Evan Miyakawa's updated projections for this season. The Zags are second in the country at Evan's website. They also have 2 top 50 players in the country. And guess what? It's not the 2 players that you're expecting. I promise you that. We're going to discuss more coming up here in just a second. Right after I tell you folks about Gametime. Folks, going to live events is the best. I know summer's over, but we still had so many opportunities to go see concerts, to go see theater, to go to comedy shows, and now we got sports back. College football's here. College basketball is just a few weeks away. And right now, if you're looking to make new memories this season, Gametime is the place to go because they have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. Speaking of tickets, Gonzaga UCLA Intuit Dome, December 28th. If you're looking to go to that epic basketball game at that new arena, right now there's a super deal on the baseline. Really good seats, $146 a piece. A lot of the tickets in that range are selling for $300, $400, $500. You can get 2 of them for under $150. They also have their all-in pricing, $76 per ticket up on the terrace. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're switching away from talking about the new changes in the NCAA regarding NLI and the transfer portal window to instead talk about Evan Miyakawa's website and their preseason projections. Folks, I reference Evan Miyakawa quite a bit on the show. I had him on the podcast a couple months ago during the offseason to kind of talk about some of the research that he's done. It's a fantastic website, does a lot of advanced analytics on college basketball, preseason projections for teams, transfer portal projections, which was a really, really valuable resource for myself over the last couple of off seasons, really. But he finally released, or recently released, I should say, no pressure on him. He can do it whenever he wants, but finally released his preseason rankings for this season. So we got preseason rankings, also came out with player rankings for this upcoming season. We're going to talk about where all those guys came out. And one thing I want to point out is he uses a system called BPR, which is more of a rate per minute analysis. So players who are very productive in a smaller minute per game sample tend to rate higher in his system than others. That's going to come into play when we talk about the player rankings for Gonzaga. And I just feel like it's an important caveat to acknowledge here. Here is the top 10 for Evan Miya's website heading into the 24-25 season. Houston comes in at number 1. They have long been an analytics darling, and so too has Gonzaga, which is why they come in at number 2. Kelvin Sampson and the Cougs at 1. Mark Few and the Zags at number 2, followed by some of the more traditional powerhouses. Duke comes in at number 3. Alabama, number 4. Iowa State comes in at number 5. A little surprising to see them be the second-ranked team in the Big 12, especially with Kansas coming in right behind them, and then Arizona after that. So you got 5, 6, and 7 all coming out of the Big 12 conference. So Arizona's 7. UConn is 8. Auburn is number 9, a very strong team in the SEC, returned a ton of talent this season. And then Gonzaga's first opponent of the season, the Baylor Bears, they come in at number 10. Really nice to see a schedule or to see a top 10 ranking that has guaranteed 2 teams that Gonzaga is going to play this year, and UConn and Baylor, potentially a third team with the Arizona Wildcats as well. So obviously not like we're surprised Gonzaga put together a highly competitive non-conference schedule, but still always good to see 2 top 10 teams on the schedule at this point in the season. Evan's website ranked offensive and defensive, just overall rankings as well. Gonzaga has the number 1 projected offense in the country. This is not new. This is something Gonzaga has frequently had the top ranked offense heading into a season. They have also frequently finished the season with the number 1 ranked offense in the country. Mark Few is an offensive wizard. Their offenses are frequently incredibly dynamic and some of the best in the entire country. Gonzaga's defense is ranked 35th. 35th is not bad. It is not great. I think if Gonzaga finishes the season 35th defensively at Evan Miyakawa or at Bart Torvik or at Ken Pom or any of the other metrics that kind of evaluate things like this, it's probably not a national championship team. I'll say this, for Ken Pom's data, going back to 2000, no team has ever won the national championship with a adjusted defensive efficiency worse than 22. Again, Evan's measurements are different, so this is not necessarily, crossover, same over same. But I think it's fair to say that if Gonzaga's defense is not top 25 in the country, they're probably not going to win the title. I don't think Evan's website saying they're 35th means they're going to be 35th. Obviously, there are things that can improve and will improve and things that will shape out a little differently than we're projecting. But if you were to try to pinpoint something that could prevent Gonzaga from being an Elite 8, Final 4 national championship caliber team, it is the overall quality of the team's defense. Again, 35th is far from bad, but if you want to be national championship level good, Gonzaga's defense, 35th, is the worst among the top 10 teams. All those other teams we just talked about, every one of them has a better ranked defense than Gonzaga. The first team that has a defense worse than Gonzaga's in these rankings is Texas Tech, and they come in at number 16. First of all, the fact that Gonzaga's defense is the worst among all the top 10 teams and they're still second is insane. That is how dynamic Evan's data indicates that their offense is going to be this season. They also rank rosters, and they actually have Gonzaga's as the 4th best roster in the country. Interestingly, Houston, the team that is ahead of Gonzaga, is actually 5th in terms of their roster, whereas Duke, Kansas, and Alabama are 1, 2, and 3, despite all being behind the Zags in the rankings. And then let's get to player rankings. 2 Zags in the top 50. I alluded to that already. One of them is Ryan Nembhard. He comes in at number 34. That's not the surprise. The surprise coming in at number 42 overall, Ben Gregg. Love to see that for Ben. 42nd ranked player in the country, according to Evan's player rankings. Next up for the Zags is Braden Huff, and this is where that conversation about players who are productive in a smaller minute per game role are going to be elevated in Evan's rankings. Braden Huff comes in as the 53rd best player in the country. Look, I love Braden Huff. I think he has the potential to be a phenomenal player. He is not the 53rd best player in the country. He's the 2nd best center on his team. Graham Ike actually came in at 87, which I think is probably because Evan's analytics don't love him defensively. I can understand that. I still think Graham Ike is probably better than the 87th best player in the country. But again, just using these particular metrics, that's where he comes in. Nolan Hickman's 5th on the team at 147, 1 spot ahead of Augustus Marcelonis, who comes in at 148 for St. Mary's. In fact, Gonzaga has 7 of the top 9 players in the conference for the WCC. Again, Nembhard, Gregg, Huff, Ike, Mitchell Saxon is 5th, Hickman 6th, Augustus Marcelonis is 7th, Dusty Stromer is 8th, And then Dane Eric Strupp from Washington State is 9. So you got, 6 of the top 9, I suppose, with Saxon, Goose, and Eric Strupp being the 3 who aren't from Gonzaga. Caleb Battle's number 13. Mike Legiai is 24. Emmanuel Inocente is 35 in the WCC. The system has a hard time with transfers, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Caleb Battle's probably not one of the Caleb Battle at 13 is not awful, but Mike Legiai is better than being one of the top 25 players in the conference. He's top 20, top 15, maybe even top 10 in the conference coming into the season. WCC team rankings, we'll go through these here fairly quickly. Of course, Gonzaga at number 2. Pretty steep drop. St. Mary's typically in that top 25 conversation. Evan's site does not love them as much this year, had them 47th in the country this year, followed by San Francisco at 74, Wazoo at 92, Santa Clara at 97. And then you get into the bottom half of the conference. LMU's at 159. Oregon State, the other newcomer, at 174, Pepperdine 228, Portland 278, Pacific 309, and bringing up the rear, Steve Lavin's San Diego Toreros 311th. Not too far off from what I'd have, although I think Santa Clara is better than being a borderline top 100 team, and I think I'd probably have them above Wazoo, closer to San Francisco, but that's just a little nitpicky. Otherwise, I like these rankings a lot. And for fun, let's look at the new Pac-12. Again, obviously, by the time Gonzaga's in the Pac-12, these teams are all going to look a lot different, especially in the transfer portal era, but still fun to kind of see how they're perceived coming into this upcoming season. Of course, the Zags are still at the top there at number 2 overall. Next up is San Diego State at 69. So actually the second best team in the new look Pac-12 is not as good as the second best team in the current WCC, which is St. Mary's at 47. After San Diego State at 69, you have Boise State at 78, Colorado State at 79, Utah State at 83, Wazoo at 92, Oregon State at 174, and then bringing up the rear in the new look Pac-12, Fresno State at 243. Not a good basketball school. They're not going to be helping in that area. Other schools that have been in this conversation for the new look Pac-12, UNLV's at 91, one spot ahead of Wazoo. New Mexico and Nevada are 52 and 66 respectively. Very good basketball programs, but not getting a ton of love from the Pac-12 right now because they're not good football schools. Memphis is at 51. Wichita State is at 101. UT San Antonio is at 180, so not a great addition there. Grand Canyon's at 46. Really strong addition. That's one spot ahead of St. Mary's. They're right in the conversation with that team. And then two of the ones that I don't think are being seriously pursued by the Pac-12, Texas State comes in at 166, actually a few spots ahead of Oregon State, believe it or not. And then Sacramento State, who would be the worst out of this group, even worse than San Diego. Sac State comes in at 324, although I don't think it's particularly likely that Sac State is going to join the Pac-12, despite making a big push to do so from their committee down there. All right, folks, moving on to talk about FanFest. It's this Saturday. We're going to meet the newcomers for Gonzaga's women's basketball team and take a look at Coach Fortier's non-conference schedule. All that and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you folks about FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a huge return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch right now in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you get started right now with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So folks, why not throw $5 down on the Zags to win it all in 2025? It's $5. You get $200 in bonus bets, whether you win that bet or not. Evan's a phenomenal resource, and he's got Zags as the second best team in the country. Meanwhile, the plus 2,000 odds on the Zags are like 7th or 8th in the country. So I think it's well worth it right there. The Zags tied with North Carolina, tied with Iowa State, ahead of both of them in Evan's rankings, yet tied with them in those odds. The Zags are slightly ahead of Arizona and Baylor in those odds as well. So folks, head to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show, getting you ready for Numerica FanFest, the women's basketball preseason scrimmage, the same event that Gonzaga has for Craziness in the Kennel on the men's side. That always has happened 1 week later on the women's side. It's a similar type event. Introduce the new players, introduce the returning players, have a couple of competitions, events on the court, and then you have your scrimmage game. It's a very similar type event. It's at 3 p.m., same time as the men's event was last weekend. It's free Free to attend. There's no ticket necessary. Just show up. If you're in Spokane, if you're going to be in Spokane, you want to be in Spokane, go to the event, show up to the kennel. I think doors open 90 minutes ahead of time or maybe an hour ahead of time. Either way, show up around 2, get in, watch this team. It's going to be fantastic. And folks, there's going to be a lot of new faces. Lots of new faces. Last year, a big part of the conversation coming into the season for the women's team was the amount of continuity that they had. Everybody was back. Basically, we're running it back. From 2 years ago to last year, more or less the same team. This year, though, quite a bit different. There are some key returnees, none more important than Yvonne Ejim, who was recently named to the Becky Hammond watch list for Mid-Major Player of the Year. No Doi, she was named to the watch list for the award that she won last year as the best mid-major player in all of college basketball. She will be a very strong contender to win said award again this year. Maud Hybens is back as well. Maud was the backup to Yvonne last year for the most part. She was 6th Woman of the Year in the conference. We've seen a trend of players who win 6th Woman of the Year award ultimately end up becoming all WCC first-team caliber players. Yvonne was 6th Woman of the Year a few years ago. Melody Kempton was 6th Woman of the Year a few years before that. Like, it's kind of become a trend. So we'll see if Maud can continue that trend here, picking up a bigger role this season. Esther Little's back. Breece Allen-Bien is back, although she is injured. We'll see if she's able to get onto the floor this season. Claire O'Connor, Ella Hopkins, both are back. Lauren Whitaker is back as well. Whitaker joined the team in mid-season last year. She's a freshman from New Zealand. She's still entering her freshman year. It's kind of a Ben Gregg type situation, obviously not COVID related, but she joined the team at midseason last year, but did not play and will be entering her true freshman year this season. Departures, the Trung Twins, devastating loss for the program. They were here for 5 years. They were incredibly talented players in that backcourt for the Zags. Will be tough to replace them. Brenda Maxwell is out the door as well. Her and Kaylee Trung were both drafted in the WNBA draft, although neither made the final cut. Maxwell, fantastic shooter for this team the last couple of years. They also lose Eliza Hollingsworth, was a starter for them last year in the front court alongside Yvonne. Callie Stokes is gone. She transferred to play track at South Alabama. Peyton Muma is out the door as well. Destiny Burton is gone. Lots of departures for this team, but also lots of newcomers. We got some key transfers coming in, a trio of freshmen as well, including Lauren Whitaker. Of course, we already talked about her. But the team also adds Vera Gunadin from a junior college in Georgia. She's initially from Turkey. The team also added Inez Betancourt. She's a transfer from UConn. Always good to get a player who's been in Gino Ariema's system. Betancourt didn't play much for the Huskies the last couple of years. She's originally from Portugal. Very nice to have a player coming in from that program, though, regardless of how much she played there. Allie Turner's a freshman from St. Louis. Taylor Dalton, friend of the program. She was on the show a few months ago. If you missed that one and you want to check it out, it's in your feed. Go find it. It was a phenomenal interview. Dalton spent the last 4 years at St. Mary's. So for her to transfer and spend her final year at Gonzaga is a fun part of this conversation, fun addition to the rivalry of sorts. She's going to step in and play point guard for this team and be phenomenal in that role. Cristobal Osorobo is a freshman from Spain joining the team. And then McKinley Dallin is a transfer from the University of Minnesota coming over from the Big Ten. Dallin is from Montesano, Washington, so she's returning back closer to home to play for Lisa Fortier and the Zags. Want to close out the show talking Gonzaga's non-conference schedule. It is finalized. It was finalized like a week or so ago. Hadn't got an opportunity to talk about it, but feeling like now is a good time as we get ready for FanFest coming up on October 12th. Here's the non-conference schedule for Lisa Fortier's program. They got an exhibition game against the College of Idaho on November 1st. That'll be at the McCarthy Athletic Center. Then they open the season officially against Montana, on November 5th. If you're looking for something else to watch, not on election night, or on election night, something else on your TV, Montana, Gonzaga at the Kennel, November 5th. 5 days later, in Palo Alto, against Stanford, November 10th on ESPN. Every time Gonzaga and Stanford play, it is well worth your attention, so definitely check that one out. Same day as Gonzaga's playing Arizona State on the men's side, so fun to see the Zags squaring off against some former Pac-12 schools there. Women's team plays Cal, speaking of former Pac-12 schools, on the 14th. That game will be at the McCarthy Athletic Center, as well as 3 days later when they take on Mountain West opponent in Wyoming, and then 4 days after that on November 21st when they host Rice. All those games at the Kennel. They go again on the road at New Mexico on November 24th, and then their MTE for this season is in the Virgin Islands, the Paradise Jam, November 28th, 29th, and 30th. They will play Missouri State and then a pair of power conference programs in Texas Tech out of the Big 12 and Florida State in the ACC. They come back, they play at Colorado State on December 8th. That is a future conference game for Lisa Fortier and the Zags against the Rams December 8th. And then they close out the non-conference slate against local rival Eastern Washington in the McCarthy Athletic Center December 14th. We'll have more on the women's team as we get into the season. We'll see how these new transfers are adjusting, how the new freshmen are filling in those roles of the departures with the twins gone, with Maxwell gone, with Eliza gone. It's going to be a lot of shoes to fill on this roster, but a lot of players really well equipped to do so. Very excited to see what this season has in store for Coach Fortier and the Zags. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast, folks. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll have another season preview episode on Friday, and then next week we'll get into mailbag. We'll get you up to date on what happened at FanFest. We'll get you ready for the scrimmage game coming up against USC. All sorts of fun stuff coming up here as the days get closer and closer to that season tip-off November 4th. Zags Baylor, Spokane Arena. Cannot wait. Thanks again for listening, folks, and until next time, as always, go Zags.